As you know, planning for instruction is a huge effort. There are many variables to consider. When planning, teachers often work to address questions like, what do my students know? What do my students need to know? How will I cause learning? For many new teachers, lesson planning can feel like a daunting task. We will scaffold the lesson planning process for you, taking a close look at the various aspects of high-quality instructional planning, one at a time. This learning session will specifically focus on standards-based instruction. To begin, let's review TEKS Dimension 1.1 on planning. The goal of this dimension is for teachers to design clear, well-organized, sequential lessons that reflect best practice, align with the standards, and are appropriate for diverse learners. As you can see, the TEKS continuum describes teacher-centered instructional planning practices on the right, moving towards student-centered, distinguished instructional planning practices on the left. Our work in this session will help to ensure that your lesson planning will result in rigorous and measurable goals that are aligned to state content standards. So, we begin with the goals for student-centered instructional planning practices defined by the TEKS, which drives us to the state standards, or Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, also known as the TEKS, for each CTE course. The TEKS define what students should know and be able to do. Next, we will walk you through the process of unpacking TEKS to develop goal-oriented and measurable student learning objectives. This process leads to rigorous and measurable goals that are aligned to state content standards. To demonstrate how to unpack a standard, let's start with an example. Let's unpack a TEKS for food science. First, find the concept or concepts. The what. Underline those main ideas. In this example, the concept is components of appropriate commercial food containers. Next, look for the verb or skill, the how. What does it want students to do with the concept? Analyze. The standard is asking that students analyze these concepts. Circle the skill. Now that we have unpacked this standard, let's state what the student is expected to do. The student is expected to analyze components of appropriate commercial food containers. Now let's unpack a TEKS for digital audio technology 2. Again, let's first identify the concept or concepts, the what, and underline those main ideas. Music styles, sound effects, or vocal performances to create a specific emotional impact are the concepts. Next, look for the verb or skill, the how. What does it want students to do with the concepts? Use. The standard is asking that students use these concepts. We circled this skill. This standard can be broken into 3 components, targeting the 3 concepts. The student is expected to use musical styles to create a specific emotional impact. The student is expected to use sound effects to create an emotional impact. And the student is expected to use vocal performances to create a specific emotional impact. It is important to note that this standard cannot be accomplished by reading about or listening to examples of the concepts. The student must use the musical styles, sound effects, or vocal performances to create a specific emotional impact. The teacher now has an instructional decision to make. Will all the components be taught together in one lesson, or will the teacher break them out into 2 or 3 lessons and tackle them individually? Let's look at another example from Robotics 1. First, find the concept or concepts, the what, and again, underline those main ideas. Motors, gears, gear ratios, and gear trains. Next, look for the verb or skill, the how. What does it want students to do with the concept? Demonstrate knowledge. The standard is asking that students demonstrate knowledge of these concepts. We've circled the skill. I also see that this standard has a context for specific application. Robotic systems. It wants students to identify the use of these concepts in robotic systems, not in cars or other machinery. I will put a dashed line under the context for specific application. This standard can be broken into 4 components, targeting 4 concepts. The student is expected to demonstrate knowledge of motors in the robotic systems, The student is expected to demonstrate knowledge of gears in the robotic systems. The student is expected to demonstrate knowledge of gear ratios in the robotic systems. And the student is expected to demonstrate knowledge of gear trains in the robotic systems. Again, the teacher has an instructional decision to make. Will all the components be taught together in one lesson, or will they be broken apart across multiple lessons? One last example from financial mathematics. Identify the concept or concepts and underline those main ideas. Next, look for the verb or skill, the how. What does it want students to do with these concepts? Identify and explain. The standard is asking that students identify and explain these concepts. We've circled the skills. This standard can be broken into two components targeting two different skills. First, the student is expected to identify the advantages and disadvantages of interest-bearing accounts, such as savings accounts, checking accounts, certificates of deposits, and money marketing accounts. Second, the student is expected to explain the advantages and disadvantages of interest-bearing accounts, such as savings accounts, checking accounts, certificates of deposits, and money market accounts. Now, give it a try. Please pause this learning session and identify a cluster-specific standard for one of the CTE courses you teach that you would like to unpack. You can resume this session once you have selected a TEKS. Now, please follow along to unpack the cluster-specific standard you selected. We will unpack a TEKS from Cosmetology 1 to guide you through the process. First, underline the concept or concepts. Next, circle the verb or skill. Third, put a dashed line under the context. Note, there is no context for specific application for this example. It is implied that the concept and skill will be applied to cosmetology work. The standard you selected may explicitly state the context for specific application or may not. Now, state the desired student outcome. In this example, the student is expected to employ the ability to be trustworthy by complying with an ethical course of action. Now that you have learned how to unpack standards to clearly state what each standard expects students to know and be able to do, the next step is to use these expectations to develop student learning objectives.